So this is 1998. This is what you call a piece of evidence.
Oh,
this thing exists in reality, and it was produced by people who also existed in reality at a place that still exists in reality and exerts a British Empire influence over this country to create internationalism or one world government or new world order, whatever you want to call it. This is like their outer circle communications. This is not inner circle. This is outer circle. So let me put spectacles
it's like a press release. Yeah. For the out. Yeah. That's a good.
Now, anyone who says, I've seen this artifact too many times and they're bored, you just put it on pause or fast forward or however it works on your end. 1998. And we have, here's an article. Okay. Here's an article. Okay. And Madeleine Albright. Well, she's interesting. How about this? Combating catastrophic terrorism that hadn't yet happened. This is prescient. And then right down here, Bernard Lewis explains Osama bin Laden. Right. And this guy right here, Scowcroft, the memoir, Scowcroft on the morning of 9/11 is in an E-4B doomsday plane on the runway.
Continuity of government thing was in play. Yeah, that was continuity the Tarpley thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And Madeleine Albright, go back real quick. That's, I mean, wasn't she Secretary of State under Clinton or something? I forget what her role was, but On America's Global Role. That's an interesting title.
Interesting, right?
At that time,
but she thinks the price is worth it. And right here, you have Philip Zelikow. He's the future head, executive director of the 9/11 Commission Report.
And now the COVID Collaborative Planning Group. He's the one who like is a project manager for the entire thing, funded by Rockefeller. And
Yep. John Deutsch, who was accused by Mike Rupert. John Deutsch worked at the CIA. He was accused of bringing drugs into Los Angeles. Crack. You might have heard.
Oh, is that the Gary Webb?
Yeah.
Was that?
That was the accusation by Rupert that Deutsch was involved. And then Ashton Carter. He later became Secretary of Defense. I'm sure this article had nothing to do with it. I'm going to show you the inside. Here's the printed on page. You got Fareed Zakaria. I think he works at CNN, right? He's the managing editor of a magazine that we're reading. Jeannie Kirkpatrick, she's in the UN back then. Paul Wolfowitz, right? 1998. Now let's go to the first article. License to Kill. Where do we know that phrase from? Is that like a 007 type thing?
Ian Fleming, maybe?
MI6, working for the Queen, you get to kill people type thing, right? On February 23rd, 1998, Al-Quds al-Arabi, an Arabic newspaper. Al-Quds al-Arabi, an Arabic newspaper published in London, printed the full text of a, quote, declaration of the World Islamic Front for Jihad against the Jews and Crusaders, end quote. According to the paper, the statement was faxed to them under the signatures of Osama bin Laden. This is how the British spell it. So whenever you want to search something that's not the American version, you have to spell it this way and you get the British version. Very convenient. The Saudi financier blamed by the United States for masterminding the August bombings of its embassies in East Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Bernard Lewis is the Cleveland E. Dodge Professor Emeritus of the Near East Studies at Princeton University. His books include The Arabs in History, The Emergence of Modern Turkey, and most recently, The Middle East, A Brief History of the Last 2,000 Years. Just a brief history of the last 2,000 years. Now, in this article, it's trumping up Osama bin Laden against the infidels, against the Jews and Crusaders. And so they're going to give you a couple pages talking about what's going on, what's being funded. Basically, when you read between the lines, these are all funded by MI6 and CIA. At this time, when Bernard Lewis is writing this article in 1998, bin Laden's got a headquarters in London. He's sending out faxes and stuff, and that's what it says in the first article, right?
Well, is he one of the key liaisons for the bin Laden group, the investment firm, or is no? In America, that is. But that's why he had a passport. That's why he came.
Before I go to the second article, let's clear that up. So I'm going to take you over to El History Blueprinto, and we're going to type in bin Laden, and I'm going to go where you think I'm going. I'm going to Salim, not to Shafiq, not to Mohammed, not to Osama, not to any of the other 20. Salim bin Laden was the money manager between the Saudis and George W. Bush. And the money manager, his name was James R. Bath, and he's the guy that goes missing in the Air National Guard when he and Bush are probably smuggling drugs. Yeah. And that's why they're AWOL. But because they're with the people who are the air pirates, right? Skull and Bones, pirates, ships. Now they have airplanes. They're bringing in drugs. This is the whole Skull and Bones motif. So Ba'ath is the MI6 Saudi connection into the H.W. Bush family. And what do they have in common? Funding the Nazis, killing Kennedy. These people have a lot of dark secrets, which keeps them in their little circular economy. So Salim bin Laden he dies like in the 80s, but he's the money manager between the bin Laden. So this is Osama's brother.
Yeah, right.
Right. Now,
but he's the key money. Okay, so I got you. Okay, I wasn't sure in the 90s that some of that was taken over, but okay, yep, good.
Yeah, and his dad's Mohammed bin Laden.
Yep.
And Salim and OBL, and then there's also
look, Deutsche Bank. They were just in the news about something with Epstein, huh?
Yeah, they do the funding because they were Arab fascists, Arab Nazis. Yeah. So the Saudi bin Laden group is where's Shafiq? They had Arbusto. I know there's another brother because on the morning of 9/11, Salim bin Laden's not alive anymore. The other brother is meeting at the Carlyle group meeting. And so if we go back to Frank Carlucci, 2 slides back, right here, Carlucci, he's got the Carlyle group. And on the morning of 9/11, maybe it was Salim bin Laden, on the morning of 9/11, they're having a meeting. So W is in Florida. W. Bush is in Florida, right? Because he's at the school reading the book upside down.
Yeah, book upside down.
He's reading My Pet Goat. He's reading that American flag book upside down.
Right.
Reading makes a country great is what's right behind him. And Alan Dulles says nobody reads. Right. So it's a total throw in your face. To me, that's a psychologically arranged set that they put him into. 100%. I don't know how much W knows on that morning because he doesn't have to do an acting job to look dumb. He can just do that pretty natural. But what's interesting is his dad spent the night in the White House the night before because W's away. The old Poppy Bush can play. And on next morning, Poppy Bush goes to the Carlyle group meeting and bin Laden's brother is at the meeting. And these are the same people that smuggled the whole bin Laden family out of the country. The whole Saudis getting air rushed while no one in this country could fly. Saudis getting out. Right, because they're in it. They're in it on they're part of the other side, right? So Nelson Rockefeller and these guys have been grooming those proxies for a long time. Top down, they created the Saudi royal family through MI6 and Sinjin Philby, and they took a royal king to make another royal king. So they're like, we could just make you royals, and you guys can have a kingdom just like the UK if you play ball. If you just play ball, right? So going back,
that's why they had no issue funding the. Was it the Wahhabists, like the ultra sort of what's the word, orthodox version, I guess, of Islam. Anyways, very radical forms of Islam.
Where's I'm gonna drag this to Osama real quick. Not technically his dad, but we'll just put it in there. So Shafiq bin Laden, I think he's the one that's at the Carlyle group meeting. So again,
that's the other brother. That's the other brother.
Yeah, well, I mean, he had like 17 brothers. So there's like, a lot of them, right? Yeah. But he's the one that's tight with, the other people, the other usual suspects. Right. So now that you look at it like that, when they're talking about Osama bin Laden in this book, these people know he's their guy. In fact, he's not even their guy. He's MI6's guy. Well, he might even be Mossad's guy.
He's part of the database, Al Qaeda. He's part of the database. That's what it means. And that's what so was Operation Cyclone with Brzezinski, like 1978, 1979. That's what they set up. They set up this proxy group to fight the supposed Russians who were invading Afghanistan at the time.
Thanks to Larry Ellison and James Jesus Angleton. They have a database. Yeah, right. All right. So now let's go to the
Oracle, the
real money shot in here. It will be the second red tab. And this is the Catastrophic Terrorism article, tackling the new danger. You got to tackle it. Let's see if I can get that out of the way. And if we zoom in, talking about WMDs. Everybody knows today who had the WMDs, Tony. They said Saddam had them, but Bush was still looking under the press table for them. They're not under here.
Saddam. Apparently this, let's see, Kid Bush got upset that they were making fun of Daddy Bush. And he's like, you know what? I got to go back into Iraq just to save face for my dad. Something like that.
Maybe.
They rolled out Colin Powell, because
maybe they just told him they'd give him more blow. All right, so weapons of mass destruction, a phrase
oh,
that
you mean
becomes
BCCI
very
never
famous,
ended.
very famous after 9/11.
Yeah,
one of the first uses of the phrase, right? Something like out of
climate
Hollywood
change
and Tom
is around
Clancy.
this time too. Climate change, like the use of global warming or climate change, is also coming into like public consciousness around 2000 as well. So you have a lot of these same sort of destructive terminology being used to sort of instantiate these ideas in the public's mind, to prepare them tacitly for these events to happen.
Right. So this is going to connect back to William Crystal, PNAC, Likud's strategies of preemption, these sort of things, but
right.
We'll get to it with some references. Ashton Carter is Ford Foundation professor. Oh, that's how you get qualified for it. You're working for the Ford Foundation, an admittedly internationalist foundation committing un-American activities since the early 1900s, right? And then you got John Deutsch, former CIA, DCI, and then Zelikow, former member of National Security Council staff. What qualified Zelikow to be on the National Security Council? Does he have some sort of Nazi connection? We'll have to check that out. Nixon surrounded himself with a lot of Nazis.
Oh yeah,
right? Because those are all Nelly's boys, all those guys that Rockefeller's friend. Okay, so in the second page of the article, now we're going to start to break it open a little bit. Elaborate international networks have developed among organized criminals, drug traffickers, arms dealers, and money launderers, creating an infrastructure for catastrophic terrorism around the world. Are they talking about themselves, Tony? Because this seems like something that could be on the back of Whitney Webb's book, One Nation Under Blackmail.
Yeah, that is a way to qualify themselves, indeed, I would have to say.
So they're saying East Africa, they're blaming bin Laden, that's weapons of mass destruction. You know, East Africa from the Bernard Lewis article earlier in the book, blaming bin Laden and saying license to kill, right? So this is them kind of through various articles in this single text, knitting together a story that comes together conveniently on 9/11. I'm sure it was accidental.
That's why Zelikow is a part of it. He's building a narrative slowly but surely to, sort of codify in the mind this idea that this individual is equivalent to terrorism in some capacity.
I'm going to go to, we already just talked
by spotting a bunch of circumstantial evidence, but putting it in places where it makes it feel like you're kind of putting the pieces together for yourself. It's very clever.
All right, so you guys might need notes from this part, because we're going to go from Salem bin Laden to Imad Salem, because before I can read this next part from this 1998 Council on Foreign Relations, we need to know a little bit about the World Trade Center in 1993.
Yep.
And Imad Salem was a paid undercover informant working for the FBI, and he was instrumental in them not using a fake bomb but using a real bomb. And there's a if I click on this, it'll take us to a wiki page here, and he was FBI informant, key witness, and Ramzi Youssef, right? So these guys get I think they're still in prison, right? He testified that the bomb was built with the supervision of the FBI.
And you hear him on the phone call. He's like literally saying, like, you guys told me to do this, basically.
Right. It was FBI agent John Antisev, and it's like a 24-minute call. Yeah. So the first footnote is that the FBI did the World Trade Center 1993 bombing by proxy using Arab proxies, but they supervised the bombing of the World Trade Center. I would never have worked in that building had I known facts like this. Right? But I didn't know facts like this until Jason Burmis told me that in 2006. I was incredulous, came home and educated myself, and I listened many times to that tape. And then I think he was represented by Ron Kuby, who was an attorney that was representing those cases at that time, and it did get admitted into court, I'm pretty sure, back in the day. But the thing exists, and you could still go and listen to it. So now that you have an idea about that, let's go back to this propaganda article, because this is what we do. We study propaganda. So elaborate networks, danger, 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 World Trade Center, weapons of mass destruction. And then it starts like this. If the device that exploded in 1993 under the World Trade Center had been nuclear or had effectively dispersed a deadly pathogen, the resulting horror and chaos would have exceeded our ability to describe it. Such an act of catastrophic terrorism would be a watershed moment in American history. It could involve loss of life and property, unprecedented in peacetime, and undermine America's fundamental sense of security, as did the Soviet atomic bomb test in 1949. Like Pearl Harbor, this event would divide our past and future into a before and after. Isn't that what happened, Tony?
There's 9/11. Yeah, right? Absolutely.
The United States might respond with draconian measures, scaling back civil liberties, allowing wider surveillance of citizens, detention of suspects. Is Gitmo still a thing? And use of deadly force. Didn't Obama drone strike a United States citizen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's questions about that. Also, what happened in Afghanistan with Biden too, with some of the drone strikes. But sorry,
more violence could follow, either further terrorist attacks or U.S. counterattacks. Belatedly, Americans would judge their leaders negligent for not addressing terrorism more urgently. So we're going to have to react fast. And then footnote here, Robert Gates. He's Robert Gates. He's Yale graduate. And I think he's in Book and Snake, A Secret Society with Porter Goss, who also was involved in these things. And his involvement goes back to JFK and the Cubans.
Yeah, Porter Goss is
the assassination
historically.
So this article goes on for many pages, wrapping it up toward the end, talking about
FEMA. There's FEMA up there. Yeah. You got the need to have some sort of federal emergency management, situation, place crisis management. Yeah, for catastrophic terrorism.
So they're saying they have something adequate for small attacks, crisis management for catastrophic terrorism. Should we use appropriate force in any part of the world to minimize collateral damage? They had this guy that was in charge of risk management at Marsh & McLennan, and he worked at Kissinger Associates. He might be a good guy to bring in on this crisis management for catastrophic terrorism. What was his name? Paul Bremer. And what did he do on the morning of 9/11? I'm just trying to remember. He was on TV.
Said a magic name.
He's the first person who said it was Osama bin Laden.
Said a magic name. And it wasn't Tim Osman, everyone.
All right, so now let me just go to the closing paragraph.
Well, I guess it kind of was.
I don't want to give away all the goodies. Overcoming disbelief, right? Because Zelikow is one of the co-authors of this article. And he is what? He's a professor in making public myths. He is
head of the COVID collaborative planning group now, who's
helping coincidentally
that is helping to craft the historical narrative for what happened during COVID. Jeremy Farrar is sort of his European counterpart, you could say, in that regard. They both specialize in crafting public business. And Jeremy Farrar just became like some type of, was he director of WHO? He got promoted to some position. It was major news. We just talked about it. Let me find out what he's up to these days. So same idea, but both these individuals, they seem to get in powerful positions, especially when it comes to medical compliance.
Yeah, I mean, on
World Health Organization named Sir Jeremy Farrar. He's a sir, by the way, so he's been knighted. Here it is. And he's basically the Philip Zelikow of Europe. World Health Organization named Sir Jeremy Farrar as chief scientist, Dr. Amelia Latu, so forth and so on. So chief scientist, Dr. Jeremy Farrar.
Klaatu was the guy from the day the Earth stood still, because they had forest fires and aliens that day.
And Philip Zelikow, let me see if I can bring up the code.
Yeah, bring that up. I'll just read this final paragraph. Yeah. Overcoming disbelief is the title. Catastrophic terrorism poses an imminent threat to America's future, but the United States can fight back only if it sets the right goals. In 1940 and 1941, the United States government pondered what kind of forces it would need to wage a global war. The answers went so far beyond the imagination that wry smiles and shaking heads in Washington offices greeted the planning papers as they made their rounds. So what they're saying is they came up with a plan to wage a global total war. Do you remember we had this thing called the War on Terrorism for a while going on? And it's a really silly war because you can't have a war on an idea. It can never be defeated, right? So it was pretty sketchy. I think that's pretty much what they're describing right there. The answers went so far, etc. The Cold War saw a similar pattern of disbelief. The notion of an intelligence system founded on photographic surveillance from the upper atmosphere and outer space, outrageously far-fetched in 1954 when the U-2 spy program was born. Funny how they have Argus and all these satellites today that spy on us, and probably wouldn't be there if they hadn't started back then, right? Wouldn't be so far along. The notion, let's see, the films and cameras alone seemed an overwhelming hurdle. Now, not so much, right? They put 2,400 iPhone cameras on an Argus camera, and they can see for 60 miles wide. A few years later, the U-2 were flying. 6 years later, satellites were in place. Similar stories could be told about the remarkable history of ICBM guidance or fast deployment of more than 500,000 troops and thousands of armored vehicles to the Persian Gulf in 1991 and 1992. America can meet new challenges, but at first must imagine success in this framework that they just painted out. Only then can it organize itself to attain it. So that's interesting. That's probably the only thing true in this whole article, this part right
here. Man, the way they sort of justify this nonsense with the
they can predict
rationalizations.
Yeah. It's not a business plan. They had a screeing ball, magic 8 ball, something like that, Tony. It's an accident. It's coincidence. You're not supposed to understand such history or the people or machinations behind it because you weren't born into that caste.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show, we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man.